Welcome to the Texas Oil and Gas Podcast, the show dedicated to bring you the news from the oil patch deep in the heart of Texas, with your host, Ryan Ray.
Well, Ryan Ray is here. I am the Brett Favre of podcast, as you all know. But Josh Shelton, once again, has slacked off. So we brought in the big gun himself, Dr. Anas Alhajji. Anas, it is great to have you on. How you doing today, sir?
Thank you. Well, I'm doing great. I feel way better now that the Ever Given is already out of the narrow area of the canal.
Well, okay. You let's just get right into it. But first, real quick, if you want to support the show, you can do so by the War Room newsletter. We'll put a link in for a 30% discount in the show notes, so check that out. But yeah, let's talk about this. We've had a ship lodged in the canal for, how was it, a week? How long was that? 5 days?
It's been a week, yes.
Yeah. So for folks who have heard the term the Suez Canal, maybe a quick backstory on what the Suez Canal was or is and how the ship got stuck.
Well, how far back you want to go?
We'll skip from the time of forward after the time of Adam and Eve. So somewhere.
All right, but there are some really interesting story to mention anyway. The idea of the canal of connecting the Red Sea and the Mediterranean is probably as old as humanity in that area. So even the pharaohs tried to create the canal, etc. But the real one happened in 1800, late 1800s. But it was financed by Europeans. But oil tankers were banned from going to the canal because they thought oil tankers at that time, the main product that everyone wanted at that time was kerosene, and kerosene is very flammable. So when the Noble brothers basically built the first oil tanker, and then everyone realized, we don't have to use those barrels to ship it on barges and ships, and they created the first oil tanker, and then they start building tankers after that. Because kerosene was flammable, the owners of the canal basically prohibited any oil tanker from passing the canal. And then Shale, at that time, built a very special tanker that different from any other tanker. And it's not only for kerosene, it can ship anything. And they knew to compete with the Rockefellers in Asia and the rest of the world, they need to pass the canal because they can have a cost advantage of crossing the canal. So they played the game. And the game they played basically is this. Shell built the boat, the oil tanker. The insurer was Lloyd, and several Lloyd board members were also members of the board of the canal. So they talked to the investors, they talked to the insurers, etc. And the board of the canal came up with the idea, said, okay, well, if Lloyd can come up with kind of exact description of what kind of ships can go safely, then we will take it. Or we can create our own list of conditions. Well, they did create their own list of conditions, and it ended up, it's the same one that Lloyd created, and Lloyd basically was the insurer of the ship itself, and then it passed. The only problem is only Shell tankers can pass because they are the only one who have those characteristics and those conditions.
Oh, wow.
Anyway, so oil starts passing through the canal. It's in 1890s, and it's been going on since then. But the canal got stopped several times in the past. The major ones basically were all political reasons. In 1956, when the canal was nationalized and Egypt was attacked by three countries, including the French and the Israelis and the British. The United States put massive pressure on them to withdraw, basically, but the canal was closed at that time. And it got closed in 1967, but after that got closed for a long period because they did not open it until 1975. strangely enough, it was an exactly by the day 8 years. So it's been closed by 8 years at that time. But we had several incidents in the canal that closed the canal, but not more than like hours or 2-3 days, and the world did not even feel it. This is the longest non-political incident in the canal ever. And the issue here is this: what are the ramifications for the insurance companies from this? Because the cost is in billions of dollars.
Right.
And the issue here is, if the insurance company of the company that owns the Ever Given is stuck with billions of dollars, then will insurance rates on the largest tankers go up if they pass the canal? Because if you got to look at it mathematically or statistically, you cannot eliminate the chance. It might happen. So if insurance companies end up raising rates significantly on the largest ships to cross the canal, then the canal is going to lose customers. But they are not going to be the oil tankers, even the VLLC, even the largest tankers. Especially those are coming from the south, that's coming from the Gulf. Mostly they are Bahri, the company that basically ship the Aramco oil. And the reason why these insurance rates will not apply to the oil tankers, simply because those oil tankers, as they are heading north, before, at the beginning of the canal, there is a small town there called Ain al-Sukhna. And Ain al-Sukhna, there is a pipeline called Sumid pipeline, that's Suez Mediterranean, so Sumid, that goes from the beginning of the canal, and then it goes west, and then tilt north and goes to the Mediterranean. So what those tankers do is they come in there, they unload some of their load, and they float higher. So the tighter part of the ship basically will pass through the canal. So they are not going to have the same problem those ships have, and they can cross the canal without any problems. Then they can go to the other side, get that oil, or probably some oil that's been stored before in the same amount, or some other ship will come and take it from the Mediterranean. So this story of the insurance, I think, is going to be a big story in the coming days, but I don't expect it to affect the biggest oil tankers coming from the south, simply because of the usage of the Sumid pipeline.
Now, is it true that the ship lost power and that's what allowed it to be blown to the side, or was it just the winds were that strong, or do we know yet?
The facts we know from the Egyptian officials that weather was a factor, but it wasn't the main factor. And they mentioned factors with S, which means that there were other reasons. And if you look at the how the ship was behaving before it hit the sides and got stuck, it seemed there was something wrong, because the speed was higher than usual. It was like someone who is drunk driving a small car. So there was something awfully wrong even before the accident. We don't know what it is. They promised that they are going to release that information. Here's the problem. I think the Egyptians are going to study the insurance contract of the company. And they are going to be extremely careful in releasing information on the causes, for a simple reason. Because if there is a reason where the insurance will not pay, no one will get paid.
Right.
So if the Egyptians make the wrong statement, the Egyptians are not going to be paid and compensated, even for the work they've done. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And all the others who suffered are not going to be paid either. If it was some reason, there is some fine print in that policy says they are not going to pay it because of this mistake, for example, or this happened. So I think the Egyptians are going to come up with a statement, and they are going to be careful in releasing all the information to avoid not getting paid based on the fine print in that policy.
Yeah, and I mean, I've looked at some of these policies before on international shipping, and as a small, what I was going to do is be very small import to the U.S. and you have all these weird contingencies and clauses. Like I think one of them was, the insurance would not cover if a Russian sub sank the ship in the middle of the sea or something like that. It's like, so there's a lot of weird.
We have some friends on Twitter basically who raised the issue of possible cyber attack. Okay, and if it is, for example, where that fits in the insurance policy,
right?
Okay, so that's why I think the Egyptians are going to take their time to think about the statement they are going to make on the causes, because if the company itself, there is no way they can afford compensating anyone, and they can go bankrupt, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
On the compensation, by the way, any service, I mean, everything in the Suez Canal is paid, which means that you need to cross, you have to pay based on a certain schedule. But if you get any other services, whatever the service is, you have to pay. So all those boats and dredgers and other things, they will get paid in full, because that's a service. It's not a free service. So they have to pay. The company has to pay, or the insurance company has to pay for all the service of freeing it. And those boats that came in from Netherlands and other places, all of them will get paid.
Right. Okay. Real quick. Two things. One, there's a lot of chatter about who controls the canal or both sides of the canal. Maybe unpack that for us. And two, have you been surprised at the way oil prices have responded during this this blockage?
Okay, couple of things here. First of all, I was a guest of the Canal Authority in 2007, and I spent a whole day there, and they took me on a tour in the canal and around the building and around the main office building, etc. I am very impressed, and I am still very impressed. The Canal Authority is just to Egypt is just like Aramco to Saudi Arabia, is the center of technology. It's where people get paid very well, kind of in terms of training experience. People speak several languages. Just like the Aramco to Saudi Arabia. And I am very, very impressed. And what they do basically is, when a ship comes in, let's say there is a ship in the Red Sea and is going to cross the canal, ahead of time, they contact the authority and tell them all the information about the ship. In a sense, they submit their paperwork to the ship, and they will get instructions. And at a certain point, the ship basically, there will be a small boat with an Egyptian officer who will climb up and go to the ship and help the captain navigate the canal all the way to the end. So there is always an Egyptian guide. So for the Egyptians, it's not only they know the communications of the Ever Given. Supposedly there is an Egyptian guy on the ship itself, and he's going to give them even more information. And with that, basically, that's how they navigate the canal, because those guys, they've been doing this for a long time. They've been well trained, and they're going to tell the captains what to do and how to kind of just maneuver around various things in the area. And of course, when they enter the canal, there is a method of payment. There are all kind of there's a lot of logistics involved. And when I had the meeting with the head of the canal at that time, it's not this one there is one in between them. So that was
2 ago,
more than 10 years ago, to 13, 14 years ago. And the guy had 3 phones on his desk. 1 page color. I remember the old phones with the things they had to dial. So 1 page, 1 black, and 1 red. And at the start of the meeting, he told me flat out. He was one of the nicest guys you'll ever meet. He told me flat out, if the red phone rings, he has to pick it up. Okay, so he kind of apologized from the beginning that I can ignore other phone, but I cannot ignore the red phone.
That's the bat line.
And once that, and in a sense, I had my team with me, and in a sense, I was wishing while I was there that the phone
Right.
red phone will ring because I want to see something live, and it did. It did, and it turns out it is an ambassador of one African country, and they have a container ship that got stuck in the canal. It did not get stuck. There was some like an engine problem, and got stuck, and it halted traffic. And he wanted to call the head of the canal to make sure that they will do their utmost. We kind of ensured him that if you guys take care of us, we will pay you. We'll kind of make personal statements. And then the guy hanged up, and he used the black phone, and he called someone else, and he said, literally, even if that ship sank, we can remove it within 3 hours.
Wow.
And I believe him in terms of it sank because it's not getting stuck in the mud or anything else. And there are many incidents that the world do not know about that they rescue ships all the time. And in fact, today on my Twitter account, I posted a story. While everyone was busy with the Ever Given, there was another container ship that lost power and got stuck. And it was rescued by the Egyptians, but no one knew about it because it wasn't that important, or it did not block anything.
Oh, wow.
So they do that all the time, and they are well qualified to it. What happened with the Ever Given is something historic, something that no one in the world had experience with. It's just different. And think about it this way. You have this 22,000-ton ship at a high speed going and then hitting the bank and literally going into the desert. So you have
right.
probably about 15 to 20 feet right there in the bank itself in the desert at a depth of about 16 feet. I mean, just like going into like a wall and just going through it, and got stuck. And they never experienced something like this, and no one in the world had an experience like this. And I think one issue that people did not appreciate was, you've seen all those pictures on Twitter and social media, how they showed the canal and how the ship is getting stuck in from both sides, and it's empty, and there is only water beneath it in the middle. Well, what people did not realize is, if you try to move the sand from beneath it from the front, and because it's weight, it sinks farther. And that was one of the reasons why they got delayed, because the more sand they moved, it just keeps sinking. And now they need to remove more and more because of that.
When it hit the sand, it probably went up into the sand.
Correct. Correct.
Okay. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, makes sense.
Correct. So that was it. Since no one has experience with this, now let's face it, there was a major PR problem, and they failed miserably in their PR. They failed miserably in terms of communicating with the media. No one can deny that. And I think they realized this yesterday when they unleashed their top experts and advisors to the media. I think one advisor was on the media for a straight, like 8 hours straight, jumping from TV station to TV station. But it was too late. On the 6th day, they were able to realize this. But it was a total failure in terms of PR and communication. I don't think there was a failure on the effort. I think this was a historic event that was something never happened before. No one has experience with. But from my visit in 2007 and what I studied and learned, it's because I wrote a long report on that. They have the capability to deal with big issues, but not as big as this one. And I think now this will give them more experience on dealing with even bigger issues than the past.
Okay, let's talk real quick about prices. We got a guest coming on here in about 10 minutes. Prices right now, as we see them, are at WTI it's above 60, Brent's at 63. The Saudis twice have given us a surprise, a gift, however you want to phrase it. I've kind of viewed that as the Saudis don't think demand's back. What's kind of been your read on what the Saudis have been doing, and what might we expect the next time OPEC meets?
Okay. First of all, there is a debate out there on what is the impact of the closure of the Suez Canal on oil prices. And everything you see basically say, well, prices just went up by $2, so it's minimal. It's not, because prices should have declined. And the largest decline basically would be about $7. So prices should have been about 57 for Brent. And I'm talking about like the maximum difference in this case. So we should not compare just the increase. We should compare of what the prices would have been without the event versus the current prices. And the difference probably at maximum is about $7. So the impact is large. But the other impact that people do not realize is this. Those ships are going to certain countries, to certain markets, and those ships are carrying certain petroleum products. So the impact is only, in this case, on certain countries, certain regions, in certain products. It's not like a total world shortage in crude or diesel or gasoline. No. So if you look at a country like Syria, for example, they already start kind of rationing the use, because they expected those Iranian ships coming from Iran carrying gasoline to be delayed, and they are not going to have gasoline, for example. So the impact is going to be limited to certain countries, certain areas, and to certain products. The Saudis, especially Prince Abdulaziz, do not like to be outguessed, and they like to be unpredictable. So I am talking right now at the risk of angering the prince, just because of that. If you look at the current market situation, it makes perfect sense that the old planned increase in production they planned last year is not going to happen. Remember, they were kind of adding production so at least we are going to see a rollover of what we had. Whether the Saudis roll over the 1 million or not, that remains a big question. Generally speaking, it looks like they are going to roll it, because it makes sense in this case. As long as prices are above 60, we are fine. We are not going to see that many surprises. If prices go above 70 and stay there, or they go back to the low 50s, that's where the surprises are going to be.
But the Saudis' read on this is that I guess my question is that we hear a lot of news about demand coming back. We know U.S. production is not where it used to be. So demand is not back yet, despite what we hear in the media. Is that kind of right?
The demand is not back yet, but we do have serious problems too. Remember, we were expecting the U.S. oil inventories, that commercial crude oil inventories, to decline and continue declining. And all of a sudden, we went up by 25 million because of the freeze in Texas. So we are above 500 million barrels right now in the United States. We should be right now, based on the earlier forecast, we should be around 465. So we are already about 40 million above the forecast. That's a crisis. That's a problem. So there is a lot of pressure on that. At the same time, refinery utilization is not going up. Still very weak.
And so how long does it take to unwind all that, you think?
It's going to take time. I think we are not going to be able to realize what's going on until probably July, to see where the trend is going to be. But the main conclusion here is, it is very clear that the Saudis wanted to continue with their policy, and they are adamant that they don't want to see prices in the 40s and 50s. They cannot say it simply because of that stupid and Opec in the Senate and Congress. So they cannot talk about prices. They talk about market balances. But we are still far away from a market balance.
Well, right. And we're sitting here looking at these prices. So U.S. producers, energy sector has done really well in the stock market. And so if prices stay here, I know we had a lot of talk about crude quality. I think this time last year we were on the show. I think some of those issues have kind of resolved themselves. The best spot for U.S. producers right now, if the market can stay. I mean, they would obviously like the price to be higher, but if it could just stay 60 for some time, that would be good for them, right?
It is, but if we are talking about shale producers have several problems, and at least we can say that the experience of 2016, 2017, where we had this massive growth, although prices were relatively low, happened because they drilled so many wells around and they figured out where the core of the core is. And then they moved to the core of the core and they wrote off everything expensive. And all of a sudden, we have this massive increase in efficiency, a massive decrease in costs. Well, now we are in the core of the core. We don't have another core to move to. So that's the major issue, that that's not going to be repeated. And whatever efficiency in terms of management or technology, that is really small. It's not going to make a big difference. The big difference historically was location. It was all about location. Now that issue of location is not going to be. That's number one. Number two, we have this issue where is there money there to finance shale? Yes, but it's way less than before.
Well, okay. So on that, my theory has been the Saudis and OPEC doing the month-to-month meeting really has prevented the shale producers from going and getting money, because instead of it being from June to October, the Saudis could change their mind on a month-to-month basis, and so the big banks and Wall Street is going to be a lot more hesitant to do a deal with the shale producer, because the Saudis are meeting and OPEC's meeting on a monthly basis. Now, I know they theoretically could have met a special meeting anytime before, but now it's there. It's every 30 days, 45 days, whatever. They're sitting down, they're talking. And so that, I think, also will keep the money out of the shale producers, because you have these meetings that are just back to back to back. What do you think about that?
I heard from some friends the following. If you go and attend board meetings of certain companies, some of those board members are completely convinced that what the Saudis did on March 7th and 8th, 2020, when they had the problems with OPEC Plus meeting on the 6th, and then they had those problems with the Russians, and the Russians decided to walk and do their own way. Then the Saudis decided, remember when they cut the posted prices, and then they increased production to 12 million, etc. They are completely convinced that the Saudis can do that at any time. So the idea here is, even without the monthly meetings, that idea is in the heads of the board members. Now you add the monthly meeting to it, and it becomes more serious. So in a sense, that sword is on the neck of all of them all the time. So it's a serious fear that this is going to happen. However, I just want to emphasize a point that I mentioned on this show several times in the past. What does Saudi Arabia want from shale? Or what does OPEC want from shale? Do they want to kill shale in general? No. They need it. Do they want to kill shale growth? No, they need it. Then what do they want? They want shale to grow in proportion, or in a way that matches the growth in world demand, in a sense where they can divide the pie. So in a sense, you know what? If the global oil demand is growing at 1 million barrels, you take 400, leave 600 to others. But if you are going to take the whole million, then I'm going to be mad and I'm going to do something. Yeah. So they want shale. They want shale to stay. They want shale to grow, but not to take their part of the pie.
So where we're sitting right now, let's see here. We got just about a minute or two before our guest comes on, and we'll go to him. But where are we sitting at right now, which is late March, about to be April. What are you looking at for the rest of the year as far as prices go, as far as U.S. shale production goes? I mean, I know we had a round table last October, and we're all kind of pretty pessimistic. Are you still kind of pessimistic about the U.S. shale industry for this year, or do you think things might rebalance in the second half?
Generally speaking, shale production will grow, but that growth is going to be limited. We are not going to recover to 2019 or 2018 levels. It will take time. But generally speaking, it is very clear that the CEOs of the biggest shale companies realized a lesson after 8 years, and they realized that it's out of all if everyone in the shale industry. It's ironic that all those CEOs, all of a sudden, they agreed with Harold Hamm, who said the same thing in 2015. All of a sudden, if you really want to assess it, all of a sudden, the genius of the industry is Harold Hamm. But no one gave him credit in 2015. And now everyone is saying what Harold Hamm said in 2015.
Well, old Harold, we could probably spend a lot of time breaking down.
I like the guy. I really like the guy.
I see our guests in the back room. We'll bring them on. But Harold's one of those guys that it's hard, like there's some like the Enterprise Depco CEO. I can't think of his name right now. When he speaks, I pretty much take what he says as he's a straight shooter. He's gospel, like it's in. Harold Hamm and the Pioneer CEO, I kind of when they speak, I'm kind of like, are they selling their book? Are they being honest? So each CEO, I just kind of got to take a different with. And Harold, I mean, I don't know. Sometimes I think he's really insightful, and sometimes I think he's more.
Let me tell you about Harold Hamm. I was in an event, and I met him several times before, and I really wanted something from him. So I walked to him and I told him that I want to send him some materials. And he gave me his business card. And when I took it and I looked at it, and there was no phone number, there was no email, there was nothing. No, I mean, just like a name, and there is no contact information. So I went back to him. I said, how am I going to send you this? You give me the card. I cannot send you this. And he said, well, just call this number. And he mentioned the name of a lady, and she can give you the information. And I told him, oh, by the way, I own this many shares in CLR. And he looked at me. He said, hold on just a second. He pulled another card and he gave it to me. And he wrote on it. He said, please send to this email, this. And so the advice to any analyst here in the world is, if you are focusing on a company, you want to deal with them, make sure you are a shareholder so they can kind of look at you.
Exactly. Okay, let's bring on Fidel. I see you're muted. Bring on Fidel Garza. Let's see here. Put him on the big screen here. So me and Anas go to the side. There we go. Fidel, how's it going, buddy?
Good morning, gentlemen. How are you guys?
Hey.
All right. Why don't you give a quick introduction for folks who aren't familiar with you? Obviously, down there in South Texas with Lyssy Energy Enterprises.
That's correct. My name is Fidel Garza. I'm a co-founder of Lyssy Energy Enterprises. We're a company that originally started putting deals together for oil and gas landowners, finding them people that wanted E&P companies that wanted to produce their properties, their royalties. And we went from that and actually started expanding our services to renewable energy as well, mainly wind and solar. And now this past year, we actually expanded ourselves into a development company of renewable energy. We still have the oil and gas deals that come by here and there, but our new concentration is mainly renewable energy. But we're agnostic for energy. We're any source of energy we're happy to work with.
Well, I know one of the things that we've heard a lot about is kind of I know Anas has some thoughts on this as well, but is kind of the idea of the wind and the solar, and what role does it play, and you have the carbon credits and the carbon offsets, and it's kind of been a controversial topic. I've been energy agnostic for some period of time because when you go internationally, when you go to a small village in Zambia, when you talk about energy policy and how it should work there, that's not the same as right outside the Metroplex. So, from your perspective the past few months, maybe what's been missed in some of the energy narrative, and I know carbon credits are kind of a big thing. And so is that going to be something that we're going to see more oil and gas companies move to voluntarily, or do you think legislation will have to push them there?
I think it's a combination of both. I think the market is going in that direction to be a more diversified portfolio of energies. I would believe it would be a mistake not to go into these new areas. A lot of potential in developing new infrastructures, and with what happened recently in Texas with the blackout, with the freeze, that basically told the market that in Texas specifically, because we're a concentrated grid, it's not open to the rest of the country. We definitely need to develop more of these projects, wind and solar, to compensate and to complement the gas and whatnot when it comes to these electrical powers. So I think there does need to have those tax incentives. I think it's very beneficial to everyone, all parties involved, including the taxpayer, which will, they'll end up getting cheaper electricity in the long run and more reliable power when 100-year winter storms like that happen. So.
Anas?
Yes. Now, my question is, when I encounter these problems all the time with people from the left basically attacking me for being in the fossil fuel industry. So what really on the ground? I mean, when you tell people, especially young students, I am in solar and wind and fossil fuel, what are there like specific stories you'd like to share with us on this and how it works out with you?
So I don't have any specific story that I can share, but I can give you my view on that. Like I said, we started in oil and gas, and it so happened that we came across it because of a demand for people, the ranchers and landowners that needed to have some protection for their income, to maintain their farms. And this was something that we decided to go and help be a part of. We wanted to make sure that the deals that were getting done were going to be beneficial to the landowner and not just the industry leaders of oil and gas. So with that said, we came across other ranchers that had this resource of wind and solar, and especially in Texas. Solar is big in Texas. The sun shines here most of the time in the year. So they want to be able to monetize every aspect of their properties, not just with livestock and crops and whatnot. So when we started doing that, we decided there was no reason to pick a side. I think it's a question that should be relevant to the dynamic of the situation right now, especially with COVID. What we need to get down to is building infrastructure and creating these new jobs that will help people that have been left out because of this downturn in prices and whatnot, and that haven't been able to go to work because of the epidemic.
So this is really kind of, I mean, you touched on an important point, because in those discussions about these issues, that here is a farmer who wants to maximize his portfolio in a sense, because it is at the end a portfolio, and he is maximizing his portfolio, and he wanted people to help him, and you guys are there and you are helping those farmers basically maximize their portfolios. And the problem with, I mean, it makes perfect sense. Okay, the problem with people on the far left is they look at it, they say, no, you have to take that fossil fuel out. And they don't realize, you know what, if it is your farm, will you do that? Or you say this as long as it's someone else's money, you are willing to sacrifice. And in our world, especially on Twitter, we get attacked left and right from, I mean, sometimes serious criticism. We have no problem with serious criticism at all. But seriously, the extreme left is going crazy, and they cannot, literally what you just mentioned to us, they cannot handle those ideas. They cannot understand what those farmers basically wanted and why they needed your help. And this is a big problem right now.
No, yes, I understand everything you're saying. It's a very peculiar situation that we find in. I don't particularly believe politics should play a hand in energy, and the only way I believe politics should play a part is in benefiting the market and the developers and the people working in these industries. They should be working together, not a left versus a right. I believe both sides have tried to paint a picture that isn't accurate for the normal person on the street, for the normal person in the field, whether it's a solar field or the oil and gas field. And honestly, a lot of times those fields are actually have those type of products on the infrastructure on the properties. We've done work on projects with oil and gas that have wind and solar, and vice versa. So I believe that shouldn't be something that should be in the conversation. The only thing I can say is that new technologies are coming, things change, and industries mature and have a lifespan that fluctuates. I do believe that we do need on the right too and the left, we do need to consider different types of energy and develop those infrastructures and supplies so that we can continue being dominant in the market as well. We do have to, when it comes to oil and gas, we do have to improve, I would say, on the efficiency of the production, how much we get out of oil and gas, and make it more of use it wholeheartedly and not. I believe when we burn some of it, we don't burn 100% of the energy that is needed. So there is improvement that we have to do on both sides of this.
So let me ask you this: I've seen some talk about using renewables to power oil and gas. I know some people use flare mitigation to power oil and gas. What can you tell us about that? And maybe what are some of the concerns, being that we did see these entities kind of drop power during the freeze?
So I read recently that Halliburton started using one of their frac rigs that is going to be powered by renewable energy, which I found was very interesting. They were going to go away from using some of the more normal ways that they power their rigs, mainly a gas. And that's something that I thought was very interesting. And a lot of these, the oil majors, they have high significant investments in renewable energies. And some of them have said, I've seen the CEO of BP saying that they were going to be expanding and have some kind of date in the near future, 2030, 2040, I believe, where they were going to be predominantly doing different natures of the energy business. So with that said, I don't see any issues, honestly, with what's going on. I believe that politics definitely needs to step aside and let the market do what the market needs to do.
Okay. Tell people where they can find more about you and your company if they want to connect and find out more about what you guys got going on.
Sure. So you can find us at lyssyenergy.com. And we're actually producing, we're developing right now 5 different projects, 3 wind, 2 solar. And we have a lot of capital right now that we're raising, and that has benefits to any oil companies that need that tax write-off and whatnot. Also, any PPAs, then they need it's actually funny. In West Texas, a lot of the oil and gas that they're developing out there, a lot of the power right now of wind and solar actually goes into those rigs
Yes.
that are working out there.
Yes.
So that power isn't even actually consumed in the Dallas, San Antonio, Houston area. It doesn't even get out of West Texas. So that tells us we have a lot of room to grow and a lot of space to run so that we can get to the metropolitan cities and whatnot. So right now, that's actually an interesting dynamic that I recently found out a couple of months ago. and that just tells me that there's a lot of synergy between these energies that need to go hand in hand in some aspects.
Okay.
Let me ask. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Just kind of quick question. In the oil industry, when a company goes to a farm, for example, and they want to drill in it, they will give like the farmer like a check for a certain amount, and then they agree on royalties over time. How does the wind and the solar companies work with the farmers on this? Do they do exactly like what the oil companies do, or there is kind of a different formula?
There's a different formula, but like everything, when anything's being negotiated, there's a lot of different scenarios that can play a part. Some of them, some other developers, what they'll do is they'll only pay royalty if there's actually a wind farm on their property. What we do at Lyssy Energy is we don't do that. We have a whole acreage, a big block that we use. And depending on whether you have a turbine on your property or not, you're going to be sharing in the productivity of that resource. Some of them also pay rent. I guess you consider rent for having the turbine placement on the property. But right now, I believe there's still a lot of room and creativity that can go into these contracts and leases for now and for the near future.
So the farmer you are working with, for example, is going to get some money out of the electricity produced from the wind turbine.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
So in case of rent, whether you guys are doing it or others, in South Texas, how much is the rent per acre per year?
I would like to give a number like you do in oil and gas, but that's not exactly how it's put together currently right now. A lot of things play a factor, whether how close you are to the transmission lines, to how viable the resource actually is. So it can actually fluctuate from South Texas, even in the same South Texas area, from here to, I'm located in Laredo, Texas. So from here to, like, let's say Corpus, where they have a lot of wind farms, it can definitely fluctuate a lot. So it'd be hard for me to give that kind of number. But the benefit of, for example, just in the royalty aspect of this, in oil and gas, you have a commodity price. In wind and solar, you don't. What you do have is you have a variation throughout the year of what is expected to be produced, and the price doesn't change because the prices are locked in for 30, 40 years. So.
Okay, no, that's nice.
All right, Fidel, thank you so much for hopping on. Lyssy Energy, that's LYSSY energy.com is the website. We'll link to it in the show notes. Best of luck to you guys in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Fidel. Thanks.
All right, let's see here, Mr. Anas. Let's get this. There we go.
I really like the idea of the farmer sharing the revenues from the outputs of the wind turbines and the solar. I never heard this before, but this is amazing. That's economics at its best.
There you go. Okay, so we usually have after our guests a quick segment called the Texas Roundup, but today we won't have that because Josh isn't here. And I do want you. I'm going to throw this theory out. We didn't talk about this, so you're not prepared. But I've been really thinking about the U.S. status of the reserve currency, and that's going to tie into oil and gas here in a second. And I really think, just putting off whatever side, this isn't a pro-America, anti-America, pro-anything. This is just strictly a what is happening in the world. And the push for a challenge to the reserve currency is coming from China. We saw a 25-year deal struck with Iran over the weekend. It's coming from Bitcoin. We've seen that Bitcoin's getting play. And then you also see that like India is talking about banning Bitcoin, and we can debate whether that's possible or not. That's a separate issue. There is a threat to the reserve currency. And that would impact oil and gas. It would seem that we have companies who right now are looking at Bitcoin as an alternative for flare mitigation. We talked about as a way to raise revenue. But maybe just 30 seconds, 45 seconds. I'm kidding. The next few minutes, maybe unpack the importance, or is it important that the U.S. dollar stays a reserve currency for oil prices, or how might that be impacted as we see these things unroll? Because if China and Iran are doing a 25-year deal, they're going to figure out a way around the dollar. unless the U.S. is going to lift the sanctions on Iran.
The issue you raised, basically, and the discussion has been going on for 40 years. So it's been going on for a long time, and many predictions basically failed. But we have certain issues we have to focus on when we have this discussion, and we have to agree on from the beginning. First of all, we have to distinguish between oil pricing in dollar and getting revenues in non-dollar. This is a very important discussion or distinction. Getting revenues in dollars could happen in any time, at any time, even 20 years ago or 20 years from now. This is not a big deal. A country can just convert the currency or tell the buyer, I need the money in this, and the buyer can convert it. But the pricing of oil itself has been in dollar and is still in dollar and will stay in dollar. As I mentioned on Twitter, basically the only time where oil will be stopped from being priced in dollar if the U.S. as a nation collapses. Aside from that, there is no reason to price the oil in any other currency. But in terms of revenues, and I think back to your point, and that's what you meant, is what if those countries start converting their own foreign reserves to non-dollar? What if they start converting every revenue they get to non-dollar? Well, there is something possible and something not possible. What is unique about the US dollar is two things. First of all, it has worldwide acceptance, even from those who never went to school in their life. Strangely enough, if you are dealing with a mafia or criminals, and you put on the table all types of money, including Bitcoin and gold and diamond, and you want to pay them and tell them choose, number one, they will choose the US dollar. They will choose others as second choice because of certain limitations. But even the mafia until today, they prefer dollars. Even when you talk to the Russians or the Iranians, they still prefer the dollar. So it has worldwide acceptance. And the second point is we have liquidity. There is no other currency in the world that has that liquidity. And virtual currencies, etc., they don't have that liquidity. So oil trade is the largest trade in the world, and we need enough liquidity to cover it. And the only currency that can do that is the US dollar. Probably you heard the discussions we had with some of your friends on the Bitcoin side in the last couple of weeks. There is no way, given what we see right now, that oil will be priced in Bitcoin.
Agreed. Yes.
But if a country wants to get the revenues in Bitcoin, they might ask for it. But there is a big issue here, and people should understand. OPEC has a chance to change the pricing of oil in 1973, 1974. And they did some secret studies and some public studies. And they concluded that the dollar is the best. And one of the reasons why, because yes, the dollar value or the real value declined after we disconnected the dollar from gold. But in terms of volatility, still have very low volatility relative to other currencies. And if you are a producer or you are a consumer, you don't want to price your product in a very volatile currency. And to talk about Bitcoin, you don't want to price it in Bitcoin when you go from 5,000 to 65,000 in a very short period of time.
Yeah, I think the Bitcoin thing is interesting. I always say my confidence of Bitcoin is a 6 to an 8, somewhere between there. I don't think it's going to get snuffed out completely, but I do think it's I do think it's more plausible than maybe the biggest Bitcoin bulls think. But I think right now for producers, if the Bitcoin mining is something of interest, that's a way to potentially increase the revenue. But I don't, well, I remember back when Trump pulled out of the Iran deal, and they're talking about what's going to happen, and all the sanctions with the dollar and how they can put pressure on the currency. I remember pointing out, well, why don't they just go to Bitcoin? And I was kind of being tongue in cheek, and the reason is they don't want to go to Bitcoin because no country wants to go to a cryptocurrency because they realize they lose the power over their citizens once they institute something decentralized like Bitcoin. So I don't think Bitcoin will get any kind of global or countrywide adaptation because what sense would it make for a government to do such a thing? So I think you're kind of limited there on where it could go. But I am curious, like the digital yuan, if you will see, Iran becoming consider working something with China on digital yuan, and so they can try to circumvent the U.S. sanctions that way.
It's already happened, and it's been happening. So there is no. It's happening with Russia. It's happening with Turkey. So this been going on, and it happened, but they already realized that there are problems, and we've seen it before our eyes when Turkey and Iran decided to exchange to do the trades in local currencies. Okay, all of a sudden the Iranian rial just collapsed, and no one on the other side will accept it. And all of a sudden they went back and give me dollar, and then they said, okay, give me gold, and then almost a year later, the Turkish currency collapsed, and the Iranian part now they don't want it anymore.
Well, one of my favorite stories from last year was the story from, I think it's Bloomberg, where Venezuela was loading up planes full of gold and sending them to Iran.
Correct. I mean, that's how they paid, so they can continue the shipments. I mean, the Iranians are notorious for this, that they are willing to help, but if you stop paying, they really, forget about anything else. They stop, and they did it with Venezuela before. They did it with India too, when India held the payments from the previous sanctions. So they are willing really to cut them off, and they cannot afford to be cut off.
Okay. We're gonna wrap it up there. Dr. Anas Alhajji, the goat. We gotta say hey to Big Oren. Hey, Big Oren. This is your this is just for you, buddy. This is just for you. So when you watch this is
big. Just for, I think we got to give him credit. Big Oren is one of the great analysts out there, not only on Twitter. Basically, it's in the world. I know you might not like this, but that's the truth, man.
It is.
He is really a great. He's a great analyst. He is a great man, a great family man, and we don't want to release his name, of course, but he is literally one of the best out there in the world when it comes to the oil business, and he has great common sense in approaching things. So this is for you, Big Oren.
We've had to clip this and send it to him. Let him make it. He can turn it to an NFT. So we can turn it to an NFT and sell it. Okay. Okay. Where can folks? So it's big _ORRIN two R's ORRIN on Twitter is who we're referring to. Big Oren, who we both know offline. He's a good chap. And then obviously, where can folks find you if they're not already aware of your work, Anas?
Well, Twitter, Anas Alhajji, my first name, my last name, Anas Alhajji. The same thing for my website, but seems like Twitter is the easiest one to get in touch with me. Generally speaking, I think the big thing that's coming up, and I'm focusing on greatly right now, is really what we are going to see in the next 3 years is the possible complete disappointment with the Green Deal, whether with in Europe or with Biden, simply because they are going to deliver, but they aren't going to deliver what the far left wants.
Okay, and also for those of you who do not know, I am now officially Anas's apprentice. So,
Big Oren has to give you a certificate for that.
Well, listen, thanks for hopping on short notice, and I reached out. I think it was last night or Saturday night, and we get this done. So I really appreciate it. And for the listeners, thank you so much. We'll be back next week.
Have a great day. Bye.